In this lecture, I will first discuss what are the different types of good. The first type of good is called a normal good. A normal good is any good which follows the law of demand. The demand curve is downward sloping. In case of normal goods, the examples that we can have is any broadband. I'll show you how we can differ, a normal good from a luxury good and inferior good. So ordinary broadband, ordinary TV license, your holiday to somewhere close by, that's a normal good. Then we have something which is known as a luxury good. A luxury good is something that is an exception to the law of demand. Here I would want to pay more and more amount and more price for this because it's luxury to me. But this happens only after I have attained a certain level of income. Examples of luxury good can be super fast broadband. It can be organic luxury coffee. It can be Netflix, from here I'm going here and I'm putting Netflix. I can consume Netflix only after attaining a certain level of income. Otherwise, its subscription is very expensive. Holiday to a foreign place, maybe a foreign holiday to some good place, maybe Mauritius. And now the third can be an inferior good. An inferior good is where you have, again, it's an exception to the law of demand. And ideally, when I talk about exception to law of demand, we actually go down to its subcategory, which is Giffin Good. Now, an inferior good is where when your income increases, demand decreases because you want to shift to normal good. But a Giffin good is where when your income increases, here also when I mentioned about exception, ideally it is not exception to the law of demand. We actually plot something which is known as an income demand curve. What happens to the demand when income increases? Something that I have already discussed as part of one of my lecture completely, which talked about luxury goods. So that is where, we kind of plotted the demand curve of luxury goods to be something like this. And we, made a function out of this also. So that is where we talk about luxury goods. When I talk about exception to the law of demand, one portion of the luxury good acts as an exception to the law of demand. For example, diamond, to which I will come very soon. Okay. So again, it depends on what luxury good I'm talking about. For some, it may not be an exception to the law of demand. For some, it will be an exception to the law of demand. For example, an artistic painting, that may be, and I might want to pay more and more for the commodity. So as price increases, the demand would increase, and that would become an exception to the law of demand. So we can have an exception to law of demand also, and obviously we're talking about income demand curves at the same time. Anyways, coming back to the inferior good, not all inferior are Giffin, definitely, but all Giffin are inferior. What's the difference? Inferior goods are those where when your income increases, demand decreases, but they follow the law of demand. By which I mean that there is a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded for them. When the price increases, you demand less, and when the price decreases, you demand more. But when your income increases, unlike the normal goods, where when your income increases, your demand also increases, here when your income increases, the demand decreases and vice versa. Whereas for Giffin Goods, both income demand curve and demand curve are not the regular ones. So here when my income increases, I will want to demand less. When my income decreases, I would want to demand more. But also when price of a commodity increases, my demand will increase. And when price decreases, my quantity demand will decrease. So Giffin Goods are ideally, something like this. If this example is, if this entire thing is normal goods, then these are following the law of demand. Plus, they are following the income rule also. And by income rule, I mean that when income increases, demand increases. Now, within this, I have inferior goods. Inferior goods ideally have something common with the normal goods, that they follow the law of demand. But they don't follow the income rule. So, ideally, they are not a subset of the normal goods, but they have something in common with the normal goods. Whereas Giffin Goods are definitely a subset of the inferior goods. So, this is inferior and this is Giffin. Giffin is, they don't follow the law of demand and they don't follow the income rule as well. Now, there are other type of goods also that you have to study. Now, let us see the other type of goods, the first being a necessity good. A necessity good, or sometimes known as a necessary good, is anything that is needed for basic human existence. For example, food, water, housing, electricity. Although necessary goods are subjective in nature. For example, for me, necessity, a necessary thing may even be a milk, but this is something which is subjective. For me, maybe broadband internet is a necessary, given that I have to teach online, I have to take classes online, I have to do everything online. But as far as things are concerned, whenever you're asked to solve questions, etc., usually we consider the basic human existence needs as necessity. The next are called comfort goods. Comfort goods is a good which isn't really a necessity, but it gives you enjoyment or it gives you some satisfaction. Now, when I talk about comfort goods, it's like subscription to Netflix gives me satisfaction. It's like takeaway food gives me comfort or satisfaction. Mostly, a comfort good has the properties of converting into a luxury. It may become a luxury good. Now, the next type of good that we have is called a complementary good. Complementary goods are the goods that are consumed together. For example, tea and milk, for example, tea and sugar, for example, TV and DVD player, etc. Next is substitute goods. Substitute goods are those which can be substituted for each other, for which alternatives are available, for example, Pepsi and Coca-Cola. The next is Giffin Goods, something that I just discussed. Giffin Goods is a rare type of good in which an increase in price causes an increase in the quantity demanded, and a decrease in price causes a decrease in the quantity demanded. Something where the law of demand is exception, is it fails. For example, rice, potatoes, breads, these are all Giffin Goods. Now, what is the reason behind this? The reason is that the income effect of a rise in the price causes you to buy more of the cheap good because you can't afford any of the expensive goods. Something that I have done in detail when we are going through the chapters of demand. So I've done this in detail. Now, the next is called a Veblen or a snob good. Now, this is again where, I just mentioned to you in the beginning, where I talked about luxury goods being exceptional. This is exactly those goods which are exceptional in nature. For example, some form of art, some designer clothes. These are luxury in nature, but more than that, these also don't follow the law of demand, because an increase in price encourages people to buy more of these goods. So, these are the different types of goods that we have. This is one way to classify different goods. The other way to classify goods was when we talked about good goods, bad goods, neutral goods, something that we covered in the other lecture.